Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Jen, a freelance graphic designer, illustrator, educator based out of the Midwest, and the creative behind the Freelance Life. This channel is where I share my skills and creative journey with you all through studio vlogs and tutorials relating to art, design, and software like Procreate, Affinity, and so much more. Today, I'm back with another tutorial in the Clip Studio Paint software, and one of the best parts about this software is the ability to animate in it. I'm by no means a professional animator, but I've learned a fun thing or two when it comes to motion graphics design over the years that I've used in video editing in the past. One of my favorite things to do is a simple form of animation for GIFs. I have an account over on GIPHY, and if you search Jen from the block when you're adding stickers to Instagram or Facebook, some of my GIFs will pop up in your feed. Creating GIFs for use on social media and in mailings can be a really great way to promote yourself, especially if you brand these GIFs and put them on GIPHY. So with that being said, this week I wanted to share my process for creating GIFs using Clip Studio Paint. Clip Studio is the perfect software for creating simple GIFs, as you can utilize onion skinning, and it has presets for creating multiple frames, and you can export the file as an animated GIF. It's a great go-to for simple projects like this or even more complicated animated jobs. So let's get started. What we want to first do is work on some form of illustration. You can go about this in an analog way and use paper and pencil to kind of map out your concepts, or you can do what I'm doing and use your iPad. I like to utilize my iPad for quick sketching, especially if it's something that I'm going to be digitizing, just so that the workflow is easier and it's a little bit more convenient for me. Less materials, I don't have to worry about scanning stuff in, I can just airdrop it to my computer. So that is what I'm doing here. I decided to go with more of like a seasonal theme. It is July, and ice cream has been a go-to dessert for my kids this summer, and so I decided that it might be fun to create some ice cream themed GIFs. So this is just one of a set that I'm going to be working on, but I kind of like the idea of drippy ice cream, and I think that would be a fun kind of like concept for this GIF. So I'm going to create this in Procreate. You could create it in Clip Studio Paint on the iPad. I don't have the Clip Studio Paint iPad version yet, so I'm just working on this in Procreate. It's just a really quick 2 scoop on a waffle cone with a cherry on top and sprinkles, and the idea is that the ice cream is going to be dripping. So I kind of want to set up my layout so that it looks like the ice cream is already kind of dripping, and then the idea is that when we're animating it and we're adding those additional layers, we're going to add the additional drips that are going further down the cone as the ice cream kind of melts away. So that is the concept for this. I'm exporting this now, and I'm going to airdrop it to my computer, and we're going to open it up in Clip Studio Paint. So I'm going to go into my applications and I'm going to launch Clip Studio Paint. But before I do that, I just want to note some of the requirements. So we want to think about sizing for web, and if you're going to put this on GIPHY, what are the best practices? So GIPHY has a support area on their website which gives you details on what they consider best practices. So I always suggest kind of going there to check out what you're going to be creating and what the requirements are, and utilize this for your file setup. So in this case, they highlight that uploads are limited to 15 seconds. I like to create mine on a loop as well so that it just kind of plays over and over. They're also limited to 100 megabytes, but they recommend at least 8 megabytes or less. So obviously you want to make sure you're optimizing your file. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger than normal. So I'm going to go with their max resolution details, just because I find that when you upload to GIPHY, it kind of compresses your file. So I want mine to look nice because they're going to be more graphic looking. And then your source video resolutions should be about 720 pixels max. So what I'm going to do is create it in a square format at 720 by 720. All right, so with those details in mind, let's launch Clip Studio Paint. I have it in my applications. I have the most recent, and I have Clip Studio Pro, but you can do this exact same process on Clip Studio EX as well. So this is what the Clip Studio Paint interface looks like before we set anything up. And the first thing we're going to want to keep in mind is our timeline, and we're going to set up a new file. So we're going to select New, and we're going to change our use of work to animation. And then we're going to want to update the size of our frame 720 to 720, as that is the largest that your file size can be for use on GIPHY. And then we'll want to update our blank space, which is basically kind of like our margins around it. I just change it to 10 all around. That way I have more space. And then what we'll also want to do is update our file name. We can change it from animation 2 to whatever you'd like. In my case, I'm going to change it to ice cream cone because that is the focus of this illustration and animation. And then we'll want to make sure we update our frame rate, and then everything else can be the same. But I like to just start off with 1 frame per second because this is a small kind of file, and then everything else in here can stay the same. We can then hit OK, and it will set up the file for us. So what's nice is once we do this is that it automatically creates what is known as an animation folder. And as we're looking at this, there are key areas I want you to keep in mind. Like I mentioned at the beginning, that timeline, your timeline may not be as big as mine. If it isn't, you can just hover over the edge of it at the very top and drag it up, and it will increase your timeline view size so that you can actually see what you're working with. And you can also adjust the view within your artboard. So that bottom area and the lower section is going to be important, and then the left area where your tools are, and then next to that I have access to my layers, and in here you'll see there's this folder that was created. That's what's nice about creating this file as an animation file to begin with. It already creates the animation folder, and that is what you will need in order to create on this timeline and create the different versions of your cells with the changes in each of the animations to essentially create kind of like a flip book idea when it comes to creating this this GIF. That's the concept we're going for, and in your timeline, that is where we're going to be working with our keys, and each of our images will be edited, and we'll basically have a 4-second loop. But before I get into that, like I said, I want you to keep in mind this timeline, and on the left hand side are layers. We're going to import images, and then we're going to trace over that, but then those final images without the background are going to need to go into this animation folder in order for us to use them within the cells on our timeline. So the first thing we're going to want to do is go into File, and then what we're going to do is import, and we're going to import an image, and we're going to find our image in our downloads, and we're going to select it. I have it untitled, and then I'm going to hit open, and then it's going to place it in my frame. What you'll notice is that you don't see anything on the screen. That's okay. It's because it placed it into the animation folder, and basically until you associate your image or your layer with a cell on your timeline, it's not going to show up. It does that for a reason. We'll talk more about that as we go through this. But for the time being, what we want to do is drag it out of this folder and have it go as a layer right on top of this folder. And then you'll see it come up on your screen, and what we'll want to do is resize this down. So once I've resized this, what we're going to do is create 3 more copies of this. Selected, we'll go up to edit. We're going to select copy, and then we're going to select paste. You'll see that first one right on top, and then we're just going to do that 2 more times. You can utilize the shortcut Command V to paste it, and I want you to have 4 total layers with this ice cream cone. Once we've created these 4 copies, then what I want to do is select them. So I'm going to hold shift on my first one, or I'm going to select my first one, hold shift, and then select my last one, and all 4 will be selected, and then I'm going to click on them with my mouse, and I'm going to drag them into my animation folder. Once we've done that, you'll see that they've been loaded into the timeline under one folder, and these folders will be important. What I like to do is create a folder for each key part of my animation. So my line work, my coloring, a folder for my shadows, and then any other like detail work that I might need. And then I'm going to go into each of these layers and I'm going to rename them really quick. To rename your layer, you're just going to double click where it says Untitled Artwork, and then you'll rename it to Layer 1 or Ice Cream Cone 1, whatever you'd like. And then I'm just going to repeat this process for each one of my layers just to kind of keep things organized. Once I've revised the names, then we can begin to kind of coordinate each of these layers with a specific frame. So in order for us to be able to see each of these items in succession, we have to associate each layer with its own cell. Before we do that really quick though, I want to make sure we turn on some animation tools in order to access the onion skinning. And under animation, you will go down to show animation cells and you're going to select enable onion skin. And then we will want to go into onion skin settings and then just make sure it shows one previous frame, one next frame, and then change your color mode to monochrome. And then you can hit OK. And then what we'll start to do is associating each of these layers to a specific cell. So to do that, what we'll want to do is click on our first second. So you'll see all of these numbers on the timeline. Just click on one so that it highlights in red. And then make sure your first layer is selected. Select Specify Cell. Once you click on Specify Cell, you'll get a pop-up which basically allows you to select the specific layer that you want to associate with this cell. So in this case, we want to select Ice Cream 1 and then hit OK. And it will basically add our first image in our sequence into that first cell. And then what we want to do next is to the left and the right of this, you'll see a little blue divider. What we'll want to do is drag that over one. And that basically adds another second to our timeline sequence. And then we want to click on 2, and then we'll repeat that process to specify the Ice Cream Cone 2 image. Once we've dragged it over, we've clicked on the number 2, then we'll go and we'll click the Specify Cell icon, and then we'll get our pop-up, select Ice Cream 2, and then hit OK. And then if you notice that it's bigger than it should be, what you can do is hover over the top right hand corner and then you can just revise the length of that cell. Once we've done that, then we'll repeat this process for layers 3 and 4. And now keep in mind, we're not keeping these. I just want to highlight the whole process of associating your layers to your cells because this will be important as we work through the next steps. Now we can go in and delete these layers because like I said, we don't need them. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to delete 3 of these layers and then pull my original one out of my animation folder so that I can use it as the baseline for my updated sketch. So for me, what I like to do is have a sketch, a rough sketch, and then I vectorize it or basically redo it utilizing a graphic pen, and then I'll use that layer as the base layer for all of my renditions to create the animated GIF. Resize my timeline down just a bit so I can see a little bit more of my image. I'm going to begin the process of digitizing this. So the first thing I'll want to do is create a new vector layer on top, and I do this because when you create a vector layer, when you utilize any of the brushes, the pencils, the pen tools in Clip Studio Paint, it will then make those lines vector lines and you can revise them and edit them, but still get the quality and texture of kind of like a more traditional looking brush. You can also make these layers reference layers and it'll make the coloring process much quicker. And then I'm going to go to my left hand side. I'm going to select my pen tool and I'm going to end up using the turnip pen because it has a nice kind of like clean vector line feel. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to adjust my brush size and then I'm going to increase my stabilization. I already have it up already as it is because my hand's a little bit shakier on this bigger tablet than say on something like my iPad. So I have to increase the stabilization on this so that I don't get really kind of wonky lines. But once I've adjusted my properties for my brush or for my pen, then I can begin to redo my line work. As you see here, you're able to edit these lines because you are on a vector layer. So you can click on that little cube with the arrow, and that will allow you to adjust and maneuver and edit your line work. And that's why I love this aspect of it. So even if you're used to working in a raster-based program, and Clip Studio Paint is raster-based, but they have these vector functions, I think this gives you like the best of both worlds. It's fantastic. I really like it. Once I do that, I'm just going to continue outlining this line work, and then I'll utilize, you can utilize your mouse, or if you have like a trackpad, you could also rotate your image on screen, your canvas, your artboard, which is really nice, and this makes it easier for you to draw certain lines. So you'll see me do that throughout this whole bit here. Also, once I've done kind of the more natural lines, if you feel that your line work is like me, it's a little jittery, for something that needs to be straight, like this ice cream cone, I would suggest utilizing the line tool. You're able to make different kinds of lines and curves, poly lines, continuous curves, Bezier curves. I'm just using the straight line because that's what I need for this cone. That makes it much easier to make sure you have a nice, steady, clean line. So that's what I'm using to create the cone and the lines within it. And then the curved lines, I'm just gonna basically use my brush again, or my pen tool again, and just kind of draw the curves as I go. And what's nice is that I don't need to pay too much attention with the overlapping. I'm going to purposely overlap my original straight lines so that I have a nice clean stroke, and then I can go in and erase them, and I'll show you how to do that. So once I'm done with all of my lines and I want to erase where they cross, what's nice is in your tool properties here, if you select the eraser tool, you'll have this option of erasing up to certain points or erasing a whole line. So if you go to your different options, one is to erase till where the line intersects, one is to erase the entire line, and then one is to erase just where the eraser tool is touching. I'm going to select erase until the lines intersect, and that'll make it much quicker for me to get through revising this line work here. And then I'll go in and I'll finish up my final details. And this is what the final artwork looks like. So what I want to do next is you can delete your original artwork, or you can just move it to the bottom of your layers and turn it off so that you don't see it. I'm just going to delete the layer because I already have it. And what we're going to do now is we're going to pull this layer into our animation folder, and then we're going to make 3 more copies so that we have 4 total. We are going to go into edit, copy, edit, paste, or you can do Command C, Command V for your quick shortcuts. Once we've pasted all of our layers in, what we'll want to do is, like before, we're going to rename them. So we'll go in, double click where it says layer 1, we'll rename it to ice cream cone 1, and then layer 2, we'll rename it to ice cream cones 2, and then so on and so forth for the rest of these. This just keeps everything organized so you know what is what, especially since we've just basically made exact copies, and then we're going to go in and revise each of those copies. So this isn't like the perfect way to do this, but I find that this is the quick, easier way to go about animating for something like a GIF. Then what we can begin to do is associating our layers with our cells, just like we did in that exercise to begin with. We'll want to associate ice cream 1 to our first, second, ice cream 2 to our second, ice cream 3 to our third, and ice cream 4 to our fourth. And then we are going to drag that blue line again, and we want to make sure that we drag it over so that it gives us our next cell. And then we'll want to highlight second number 2 in red. And then what we will do is select ice cream 2, the layer ice cream 2, and then we will go to our specify cell, and then we'll get our pop-up, and then we will select that second layer, ice cream 2, and then we'll repeat this process for layers 3 and 4. Once we've specified all of the cells, then we can begin to revise our line work. What we want to do though first is make sure that onion skinning is turned on. It allows you to see that layer that is underneath it, so that you can revise your lines based on that layer. That way it creates this nice smooth transition as you're kind of animating and flipping through each of these cells. I'm going to keep the original picture the same, but then I'm just slightly going to modify the height of the top scoop and then the melting kind of like ice cream dripping down the sides. You're only going to see the layer that is currently selected, which right now we're on ice cream 2, which is the second layer. So I'm basically going to elongate and stretch the actual like drips down the side. And because we have onion skinning turned on, what you'll see is that when we go in to erase anything off of this new sketch, that the other under layer will show up as a purple outline. Once I've erased what I wanted, then I can start to reshape this drip using my pen tool. So I'm just gonna redraw it out, kind of making it look like the drip is kind of lengthening and widening and spilling over the side. And then I'm going to go up to the second scoop that's right on top, and I'm going to erase some of that left side drippage. And again, you'll see the purple underneath. This just helps me keep track of where my line work is. And then I'm going to adjust and edit this. The other thing that I want to do though is make that top scoop kind of lower in height. So this is going to require a little bit extra work to do, but we'll get through it. So in order to shrink down this top scoop, what I'm going to do is utilize my lasso tool, and I'm going to basically direct select the area that I want to edit, and then I'm going to cut that off of my image, and then I'm going to paste it. So once I select it, I'll go to edit, cut, and then I'm going to select edit, paste. And you're not going to be able to see this. So keep this in mind. This is because it's not associated with anything on my timeline yet. It doesn't have its own cell. Once you've cut it, what you can do is just kind of eyeball how much lower you want this to go. So if you've already pasted it, you can use your down arrow, or you can just use your trackpad and drag it down a bit. And then what we'll do is you'll want to group and merge these two layers again so that it shows up by selecting both of them. I select one, hold shift, select the other, and then I right click and I merge the layers. And then I'm able to see how far down I've brought this, and then I can go in and clean up the edges and revise and delete any of the overlap that I don't need or that's unnecessary. And then if I need to, I should go back and rename, but as you see, it just kept ice cream 2A, so it kept whatever was the title of the layer above it. It kept that title for the merged layer, but you can go back in and rename it just to kind of keep things organized. Now I want to start working on that next one. Click on that new layer that I'm working with, and you'll see that the new lines come up in purple. And then for this, again, I'm going to select the top part of the ice cream cone, that second scoop. I'm going to use my selection tool to select it, and then I'm going to go into edit, cut, edit, paste. And then I'm going to drag that down, and then I'm going to select that new layer that's created and the original third layer, and I'm going to group it so that we can see it, and then I'll go in and I'll clean up my lines. And what I like to do as I'm working through this is play it. What you'll see in the timeline, you'll have the option for like a fast forward, rewind, and play button. I like to play the loop just to see how it's looking, to make sure it's making sense and to make sure it looks the way I want it to look. And as I test it, it looks like it's working. I'm noticing that there is like a blank page. I think that's from that paper. I'm going to remove that when I'm done, but for the time being, this is making sense. So what I like to do as well is periodically go back through and revise my line work, clean it up as needed so it's not so messy, and so that everything looks clean and, relatively well done for, doing this really quick for this tutorial. And then I'm going to play this just to see what it looks like. And I think it is working well. So I like what I see here. And then we can jump into coloring. So once we have our line work done and it looks like we want it to look, I like how this looks. It's just a really simple 4-frame animation with the ice cream dripping. Now what we need to do is color it. In order to color, like I said earlier, we want to make sure that we have an additional animation folder. I like to have an animation folder for the line work, for the coloring, and for any shadows and detail work. So I'm going to create a new animation folder by going into my timeline menu here, and I'm going to select new animation folder, and you'll see in my layers it'll create that new folder. And what I'll do is I'm going to double click where it says folder 1, and I'm going to rename it so that it says color. And I'm also going to rename my original folder and rename it line work. So that way I'm just keeping everything organized, easy to find. Now what I want to do is right click that whole entire folder, and I'm going to select layer settings, and then I'm going to select set as reference layer, and that basically sets all of my layers within this folder as a reference layer so that I can utilize the fill bucket tool to color my artwork. Now what I'll need to do is go into my color layer, and I'm going to need to add in some new cell layers so that I have cells that I can reference to the already created line work cells. And then in my timeline, I'm going to select the add new cell layer, and I'm going to create 4 of those. And then what I'm going to do is go into those layers, rename them. Again, I know this seems tedious, but it's to keep things organized. So once I've done that, I'm going to drag that color folder underneath my line work folder. This allows me to reference the layer above it, and also allows the line work to lay above the color. And I can click on my first layer, and then I'm going to utilize my fill bucket tool, pick my first color, and then I'm just going to start filling each of my shapes. Keep in mind though, you do have to have closed shapes. So like all of my line work is completely closed. There's no gaps, no openings. That way I don't end up filling or flooding my whole entire workspace with color. I'm going to go through and just add color in the same process. Update my color in my color palette, make sure I have my flood fill tool, and then just drop the color into my next section. And then if I notice anything that seems off, I'll zoom in so that I can fill it closer, and then I can also go in and just double check any of my line work and edit and clean that up if I see something that looks odd. And then I'll just do this whole process with all the other colors for all the other sections. So once I've filled my color for that first layer, then I'm going to select my next layer. And what you'll see is when I'm in that layer and I start to fill my colors, I just kind of refer to my color palette here that has my most recent colors that I've just used, so that I can make sure I'm selecting the same colors. And you'll also see that the color work underneath is going to be in purple. You can turn this off if you want by just selecting the eyeball so it's not confusing. And now that I've got my second cone color, what I like to do as well is just make sure that all of these layers in this folder are associated with a cell. So in this case, my ice cream color 2 layer should be associated with the number 2 cell. So it's not going to override what's already there. It's literally just placing it under, as you see. And then I'll do that for the additional 2 before I start coloring actually. So I'm going to go into this third layer. So this next ice cream cone layer that I need to color. And then I'm going to select 3, make sure it's highlighted in red, and then I'm going to make sure I select that correct layer in my select layer options, and then I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm just going to do the exact same thing for the final 4th option. I'm going to select that layer. I'm going to then click on the 4th cell here, make sure it's highlighted in red, and then go into my select specify cell. I'm going to get my pop-up, and then I'm going to select that specific layer and then hit OK. And then I'm going to go back to my 3rd layer so I can start to color it. And again, you're going to see the different colors underneath, so you can just turn them off. And then just make sure that the layer you're working on for your line work is turned on. And then you can begin to utilize your fill bucket tool to finish filling out the rest of these colors. And then once I finish filling the colors, I like to just kind of play it, check it to make sure everything looks right. And then I'll finish out the rest of these colors. And then what I like to do is add just a bit of shadowing. So keep in mind with the shadows, it's going to move with the the new shapes that you're creating within this ice cream, or at least in my case with the ice cream. So I have to create another folder with 4 additional layers so that the shadows will be in the correct place on each of these images. And then I am going to start working on my first set of shadows. And what I like to do is work on the first set, copy those, and then paste them multiple times, and then just revise them based on the placement of the new image within the animation. It just makes the work a little easier, so I'm not having to redraw them every single time. So I'm going to work on this first set. And also what's important is that within this layer, what we want to do is go into the layer options, and where it says normal, change it so that it says multiply, and that way it'll multiply those additional layers within the folder so that it's not so dark. So I'm going to select kind of like a grayish color, and then I'm going to go in and select a paintbrush this time, and I'm going to go with something that has a little bit of texture, but that is overall smooth. So I think this smooth India ink will work well for this. And then I'm just going to begin painting where the shadows might be. And then once I do this the first time, I'm going to add shadow to the cone, and then I'm also going to add shadow to the ice cream. Once I've done that, then I'm going to go in and I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to paste it 3 more times. And then after I've copied it 3 more times, so I have 4 total layers in my shadow folder. And then once again, what I'll need to do is assign each of these layers to the same cells. So shadow 1 will go to that first second we'll go to that first cell, shadow 2, we'll go to the second cell, shadow 3, we'll go to the third, and then shadow 4, we'll go to the fourth. Select layer 2 and then make sure my cell 2 is highlighted in red. And then I'm going to go to my specify cell icon. I'll get that pop up and then I'll need to select 2. And then I'll repeat that process for each of these other layers. And then I'll just go into these layers and then I'll revise the actual shadow placement using my eraser and just adding additional shadow as needed wherever it's needed. And again, this way I didn't have to recreate the whole entire thing. It's already set, it's already created. And all I have to do is revise it and just edit it. And I think that just gives it a little bit more of a 3D effect. It's not absolutely realism, but then again, I don't think any of my artwork ever is. But it's fun and I like the sense of detail it gives it. Once I'm done with all of my revisions, what I like to do is just play it once more to see what the final outcome looks like, make sure that there's no issues, see how it looks. And I think I'm happy with this final piece. I think it looks really cute. And I really like how simple it is to actually do this in Clip Studio Paint once you get the hang of it. Once you figure out the timeline and once you figure out how the layers and the animation folders work, then it's a piece of cake. So now that this is done, what we're going to want to do is export this. Export animation as an animated GIF. And then I'm going to save it in my file folder, hit save. And then if you notice that it changes the width and height, just go in and update it. I'm going to change it back to 720 and then hit OK. And then hit OK again. And then you can go in and see where your file is to test it. So I'm going to get out of Clip Studio Paint. I'm going to go into my file here. And then I'm just going to double click it to open it up, or you can, if you're on a Mac, you can hit spacebar and it'll show you a preview. And this is what the final product looks like. I really like it. I think it turned out great. Thanks so much for creating with me today. I hope you feel more confident creating an animated GIF in Clip Studio Paint. I really think this is a great software for this kind of project. While you can create a GIF in apps like Procreate, I like having the additional bells and whistles that Clip Studio Paint offers. If you end up making your own GIFs and create a GIPHY account, please share it in the comments below. I'll be sure to include a link to my account in the description box. If you like this tutorial, please leave a like, and if you're not already a part of this wonderful creative community that I've got growing here, please subscribe. Thank you all for your support, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.